You can count on it. Whenever and wherever Christianity has thrived, persecution has rarely been far behind. As I journey to the south of France, I begin my time with those persecuted French Protestants, forever known as the Huguenots. Each one of these trips takes days and days to plan. We spent hours trying to plot out every route, make sure we're doing things as efficiently as possible, and usually things work out very well. This trip, our first flight was fine, but then the flight following that, we missed. The one after that, they had a mechanical problem in the planes. We started looking at the distance and realized we could probably drive it just about as fast. So we rented a car. We're now on the Autobahns heading from Germany all the way down to the south of France, and then our journey will start for real. This project has taken us to some pretty out-of-the-way locations, museums. I don't think any has been as far off the beaten path as this. We've come to the home of Marie Durand. I believe there's a museum here. Enter a traditional home to see. I'll go see what there is to find. One of the most important and really one of the most world-shaping movements to arise from the Protestant Reformation was the Huguenot movement. The Huguenots were French Protestants, and very quickly they came under intense persecution. And I'm of Huguenot stock myself, as are many people, and I had a deep interest in exploring the roots of the Huguenot movement, and I found it best encapsulated in the person of Marie Durand. She was a brave figure, she was a tragic figure, and so aptly represents the entire movement. And so I wanted to search for the place where she suffered in prison, but also the place she came from. This is where they were imprisoned. Just imagine being here for year after year, in this island fortress. Inside the fireplace, at the bottom on the right-hand side, there's an opening concealed by a slab of stone. It was the minister's hiding place. One of the realities of the Huguenot period is that pastors were considered especially dangerous by the Roman Catholic authorities, and they were imperiled. They were often imprisoned. Many of them were killed. That included Marie's own brother, who was a very prominent minister whose life was in danger. And so many Huguenots would create hiding places within their homes where they could hide away pastors to keep them safe.
Constance. She was to stay there 38 years. Matthew was sent to Fort Preston by his father-in-law.
You hear so much about the great world museums, the one in the great cities of the world, and yes, you should visit those. But sometimes it's worth getting way off the beaten track and finding some of the little museums dedicated to one person or one event or one region or something. I don't exactly know where we are. I couldn't find this place on a map. We had to follow a GPS to get here. In fact, I don't know that I can really pronounce what this place is. It is the birthplace of Pierre and Marie Durand. It is Musée du Vivre Protestant. It's a wonderful little museum that's settled in this home here, this eclectic little building. Lots of history here, English available, really worth seeing if you're ever in this area of France. Now we've come to the Musée du Désert, the Museum of the Desert, of the Wilderness. This refers to a period of time where there's intense suffering, intense persecution against the Protestants by the Catholic majority, the Catholic leaders in France. Marie was, of course, caught up in those persecutions, as were her parents and her brother. This museum is dedicated to it. I'm very interested to go inside and see what objects remain from that crucial time period of Huguenot history. It's not like we were here in peak season, and yet there were still so many people visiting this museum and the other ones we went into, and I suppose that makes sense because the Huguenots were spread throughout the world, and many people today, as they recover their roots, as they explore where they've come from, they end up, like me, right here in these small villages in France. This is a spot beneath the cabinet here where you could hide people. There's a false floor, and beneath it a little area where people could go to hide as they feared persecution, as they feared capture. One of the realities of the desert period is that Protestant worship was illegal. And so they would still worship, but they'd have to do it on the sly. So what they would do is create pulpits that they could move around, and that could be hidden. It would not be obvious they were pulpits. And so this is made to look like a grain barrel, yet it opens up into a pulpit. One thing we've seen repeatedly as we've been visiting sites and museums related to the Huguenots are these mirrors. You see that the mirror juts out, and that's so they could hide a Bible behind. If we were to take it down and turn it around, you'd see there's a place to conceal a Bible or a Psalter or some other forbidden book behind it. This room is dedicated, at least in part, to Marie Durand. We saw her confinement in the Tower of Constance. This is an image of that. Making you think of all those women confined in that small space year after year after year. It's almost unthinkable, unimaginable. We've seen the spot Marie was born. We've visited another museum about the Huguenots that included some highlights of her life. There's just one thing left to do, and that's to visit the spot where she lived out the great majority of her days. She was held prisoner in this tower for many, many years, and if we go inside, I think we'll find some exhibits there related to her life and to her times. From 1692 to 1768, the tower became a prison for the Huguenots and later a women's prison, those who persisted in their Protestant faith. So that's who was held here for many years. Here's a list of some of the people who are held in the tower, including, of course, Marie Durand. It's worth just pausing to think about that. She was arrested when she was just a teenager. She languished in this tower for 38 years through what should have been the best part of her life. And at any moment she could have been released. All she needed to do was say, I recant. All she needed to do was revoke her Protestant faith and she could have been set free. But she didn't. Year after year they would bring priests to her expecting her to renounce. She refused, and so she stayed here for 38 long years. It's remarkable. I've heard that there's a piece of graffiti somewhere in this tower attributed to Marie Durand. I'm eager to find it. I'm not sure if it's here or if it's somewhere else. There's all sorts of graffiti here left by people who are imprisoned in the tower. There's one piece of graffiti here that is especially significant. It's the word simply resist in French, résister. And tradition has it and has had it since Marie was here, that she was the one who wrote this just as a sign, as a symbol of her resistance against conversion, against denying her faith, denying her Savior. Got it here behind glass. What an amazing little artifact of a life well lived. The foremost theological influence over the Huguenots and the Huguenot movement was another Frenchman, John Calvin, who was forced to flee to nearby Geneva. We've come to Geneva, Switzerland, which is known for many things, but for my purposes, it's known as the home of John Calvin. It was here that he did so much of his writing, so much of his preaching. It's here that he really came to prominence as one of the great Christian theologians. There's a number of things I'd like to track down. I'd like to go to his church. I'd like to see where his home was. I'd like to go to his graveyard to see where he lies, and along the way, see if there are any objects that might tell me more about his life and times. One of the attractions you just have to see when you come to Geneva is the Reformation Wall, a giant wall that pays tribute to the Reformation and to some of the key reformers. On the wall we've got Calvin, we've got Farel, we've got Beza, and we've got Knox, four of the keys to the Reformation. You wouldn't know it from the darkness of St. Pierre's Cathedral, but it's actually a beautiful, bright day outside. This is the cathedral where John Calvin preached for many years. There's very little that remains here that's original. I believe the pulpit exists, but it's been reconstructed. But there is his chair set in the darkness there by a pillar. We'll go take a look. We've emerged from the darkness of St. Pierre's Cathedral into the beautiful sunny courtyard outside. I don't think there's a whole lot in the cathedral that survived from the time of Calvin. I believe that pulpit, one of the most significant pulpits in Christian history, I believe it was reconstructed at some point. But set beneath it is Calvin's chair. Maybe that stands in as a great summary of who the man was and the legacy he left us as a scholar, as somebody who sat and studied the Word of God and who wrote sermons, who wrote books, who wrote most famously his Institutes. So let's let that chair stand in as a summary of who the man was and the legacy he's left us as a great Christian leader. Right down the street from St. Pierre's Cathedral is the spot where Calvin's house once stood. Yeah, there's a plaque on it. If we find it, I think it's somewhere right around here. Yeah, right here. So the house no longer exists, but this was the spot. So the house in which he dwelled was demolished in 1706 and replaced by this one. John Calvin was and still is quite a polarizing figure among Christians. Whether you'll ever hate him, I guess there's something you ought to respect about him, and it's this: he knew the power of fame and celebrity, and he really didn't want to be venerated after his death. So he asked that he would be buried in an unmarked grave. I believe he was buried here in this cemetery. I'd like to look inside and see if there's any trace at all that we can find of him. I don't even know where to begin. We can look over here maybe.
E8, 707, yeah.
E8, so E8, yeah, 707. So just follow the road around. I think it's this one over here with the little fencing surrounding it. John Calvin, 1509 to 1564. By his request, there was no marker to indicate the place. It was just another mound like those of his wife and baby. Calvin was thus buried in a common grave. This tomb is therefore not where Calvin is actually buried, though he was buried in this general vicinity. We began this journey down in the south of France looking for objects related to the Huguenots and found some really amazing things. And interestingly, John Calvin was the great theological influence over the Huguenots, especially in the early period. So we drove to Geneva and we found at least one good object related to Calvin. And now we're headed to Basel, where we want to find some objects related to Erasmus, the great humanist scholar who in his own way was a heavy influence over Calvin. So there's a neat connection between these three sites, three objects. We're on our way to the Basel Historical Museum, where we hope to track down something related to Erasmus. A church building, I believe.
Ja, wenn wir da gesehen sind, fahren wir nochmal ab, dann kannst du wieder Glas machen.
Most furniture is made to be functional, some is created to make a point, and that's very much the case with this cabinet. It has on it pictures of Solomon, of Virgil, of Aristotle, representing the great Hebrew and Roman and Greek scholars. And then there's also one of Erasmus. It's meant to make the point that Erasmus is taking his rightful place with the greats of history. The Basel Historical Museum has an amazing collection. They've got local history and Swiss history, some Reformation history. What I wasn't able to find is an object that directly relates to Erasmus. There's that cabinet, which I love, but it was created in honor of him. It wasn't actually his. There's some of his artifacts, his household goods there, but nothing that really jumps out at me. So what I'd like to do is head to Zurich, to the National Museum there, see if we can find something that more directly relates to the man, to his life, and to his legacy. So what's the big deal with Erasmus? Well, Erasmus was one of many humanist scholars, and when we talk about humanists today, we're using a different form of the term. Humanists in that day were people who were going back to the ancient literary sources. They were recovering them and seeking to base their lives on them. Erasmus had a particular interest in the New Testament, and what he did was collected as many manuscripts, original or ancient manuscripts as he could, to try and recover the ancient New Testament text. And as he did that, he necessarily began to see how it diverged from the common Vulgate text that was in use in that day. And that recovered text started to show there were some pretty significant theological problems with the Vulgate text. This is the Erasmus New Testament. It says here, Basel book printing at its peak. The New Testament, edited by Erasmus, is one of the most beautiful books ever printed in Basel. Luther used the 1519 edition for his translations.
Sorry, what is this again?
This is Zwingli's helmet and sword that he was wearing, that he was holding as he fell in battle. It says here they ended up in Lucerne as spoils of war and were only returned to Zurich after the 1848 Civil War. The museum here in Zurich had exactly what I was hoping, which is a 1519 Erasmus New Testament. You could look around, find books all over the place. Here's a book that I really believe changed the world. It was the Bible that Luther used to make his translation. You can hardly overestimate its impact on the world, on the history of the church. In this part of Switzerland, we're just about 45 minutes from the city of Constance over the border in Germany, and I knew there's a museum there dedicated to the pre-reformer Jan Hus. I needed to give that a look. So usually when we're interested in going into a museum, they're very eager to have us. It's not a problem. Occasionally though, we've had a little bit of trouble. That's the case with the Hus Museum here in Constance, Germany. We've tried and tried to get in touch. We haven't heard back. I'm not so sure we're actually going to get in to film. We'll do our best. We'll see what we can find. Well, we gave it our best shot. It's a great museum, free admittance, highly recommend going, but they were not interested in having us take any photos or shooting any film in there. So unfortunately, we're not able to do that. Still some great objects related to Hus, including the jail cell door that once held him, as well as a stone that held the shackle that pinned him there. So objects of true significance, great museum, highly recommend it. Sorry that I can't show it to you. This journey through France and Switzerland introduced us to the scholar Erasmus, who was a profound intellectual influence over John Calvin. Calvin was in turn a great theological influence over the French Protestants known as the Huguenots. From a Dutch scholar in the ivory tower of academia to a French teenager in a stone tower reserved for prisoners, we see how the Lord guides history in the most unexpected ways, but always toward His own glory.